Perhaps we are starting at 10 minutes after the hour. So perhaps if you can put up your slides and then advance so we can check if that works.
Okay. Oh, I never used Teams.
Yeah.
Teams has changed since I last share screen.
So if you go at the top,
I'm trying to share, but it's asking me whether I want to share a window or whether I want to share a screen.
Okay, it depends because if you want to share your window, you'll have to have the presentation already opened. And then when you click on the window, you should then be able to see your presentation.
That's what normally happens.
Oh, it's fine. You can perhaps just share your screen and just.
No, hang on. Currently sharing. No. I can't see the windows. That's the problem to share.
You are sharing your screen for a second. Is your PowerPoint open? Like, do you have it in minimized? Okay, so share your screen rather, and then you will go down on the panel below and just click on your presentation from there. Sorry about this.
No, won't let me, Sim. So I've got PowerPoint open and it won't let me.
Okay, now go to share. Yes, and now you go to your PowerPoint.
No, I'm not. I know what it looks like. It normally allows me to see all the windows on my computer that I have open, but it's not giving them to me. There is one small problem, Sim, and that is that I'm using the browser, not Teams, because it wouldn't let me into Teams, my Stellenbosch password. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to share the PowerPoint with you, and if necessary, we're going to have to do it that way.
Well, there I have it. I see your presentation now.
Oh,
Go to it again.
can you see it?
Yes, then if you just press on on presenter view, so I do not see your
Can you do it?
Yes, there we are.
Okay, so I can just do it at the bottom of the screen.
Yes, perfect. Yeah, it's advancing.
Okay. Okay, so it seems to work then.
Okay, can you go back on the slide and then leave it there?
Stop share. Oh no, go back on.
Go to your presentation where you were and then leave it on, play from start. Yeah, leave it there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, we will start in 6 minutes. Okay, we can start. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mbongile, better known as Sim. I am an advisor at the Center for Teaching and Learning. So today, our Auxin webinar is presented by Professor Chris Bowie. So I'm going to give a quick short bio of Chrissy Bowie for those who do not know. So Chrissy Bowie has worked in teaching and learning at a number of South African universities. At Rhodes University, she was Dean Teaching and Learning and Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic before her retirement in 2019. She now holds a Professor Emeritus position at Rhodes University and is a Professor Extraordinaire at Stellenbosch University. She is author with her colleague, Professor Sue McKenna, of the book Understanding Higher Education, Alternative Perspectives, published by African Minds. Her most recent research looks at the ways knowledge as an entity in its own right. So, Chrissy, thank you so much. Today, she is going to be presenting on artificial intelligence and knowledge. Over to you, Chrissy.
Thanks very much, Sim, and thank you very much for inviting me to do this. So I'm really testing out my knowledge, my understanding with you, my thinking. It's quite recent thinking, and it's probably, might seem quite messy, complex, but anyway, let's see where we get to. So if we look generally at developments in teaching and learning, in recent years, what we've seen very, very firmly is a movement from a focus on learning learners to acts of learning and the people who learn, to a focus on what is learned, to a focus on knowledge. I'll talk a bit more about that. And then, of course, more recently, we've had the arrival of artificial intelligence and a whole lot of concerns in the field of teaching and learning in higher education about that. So if we look at the first, the shift from learning and learners to knowledge, you have to go back in some time to the 1970s onwards. And what happened then was we got a focus, you can locate it to a large extent in Michael Young's new sociology of education, to a focus on the way learners construct knowledge. So Michael Young's concern was British sociologist. His concern was that working class learners in British schools didn't do as well as the middle class counterparts. And so the question is, well, why is that? And he argued that what then learners needed to be able to do was to bring their own knowledge of the world to the classroom, that ways of understanding the world were being imposed upon them. So the argument would be multiple ways of understanding the world. Some ways of understanding the world around us are privileged in formal education and universities, and that learners should be able to bring their ways of understanding the world to the classroom. And of course, that probably sounds very familiar to many who know about education, not necessarily higher education, but education in South Africa, because that was an argument that was prevalent as we looked at curriculum change in the 1990s onwards. But that argument resulted in an interest in themselves, an interest in acts of learning, drawing on the position of constructivism, social constructivism. And the idea then was that teaching was a process of facilitating learners' construction of knowledge. So yeah, teaching very much as an idea of facilitating. So that was dominant from the 1970s onwards, including in higher education. If you look at research in higher education, teaching and learning in higher education, you get things like the whole approaches to learning, you know, the work of the Swedish phenomenologists, Martin and Salio and people like that, Noel Entwistle, looking at the approaches students took to their learning and so on. So it was very much about learning and not knowledge. turn of the century, and we start to see calls to bring knowledge back in. And I'm sorry, I've got Wheelahan there. She was actually 2010. It's a simple typo. So Wheelahan wrote a book, Why Knowledge Matters in Curriculum. Just one of the people calling for a focus on knowledge, including Michael Young, who really shifted position because it was his new sociology of education that has led us to look at acts of learning and learners. So in this call to bring knowledge back in, to refocus on the knowledge itself rather than the acts of learning, knowledge is seen as real, something that exists regardless of the way we see it or understand it. So it's real. So the knowledge exists, even though our ways of understanding it can be relative to us, who we are, what sort of experiences we've had, and so on. So it calls to think about knowledge, the nature of knowledge, and so on in education. And this was all helped by the work of Basil Bernstein, again, a British sociologist, who identifies two ways of describing the world around us. And he calls them horizontal discourse and vertical discourse. So a discourse really is a way of describing the world around us. And we've also got the work of Jean Gamble here in South Africa, and Carl Mayton, who's now in Australia, but who was Bernstein's student. We've also got their work, which contribute to our understanding of different forms of knowledge. Gamble's very much interested in vocational knowledge. So if I try to explain horizontal discourse, and forgive me for those who already know this, so this way of describing the world around us draws on experience, our own experience, to make statements about the world. So an example might be, it always rains in summer. And of course that's true, depending where you are. I live in the Western Cape. It doesn't rain in summer. The rain comes in winter. It's true for part of the year, but not all the year. And of course, it might not be true in the future, given climate change. So this horizontal discourse, these statements about the world around us based on experience, are localized and they're context bound in space and time. And they usually involve spoken language. So we encounter horizontal discourse from birth as our caregivers tell us about the world. Oh, look, the sun is shining, and so on. Oh, look, it's whatever. So we all get this horizontal discourse. The second way of describing the world, vertical discourse, draws on abstractions to provide theorized, systematized accounts of the world. And an example would be the rain cycle. So if you think about the rain cycle, we were all taught that in school, primary school, and you know the story. The sun shines on the ocean, the water in the ocean heats up, the water in the ocean evaporates, the water vapor rises, it forms rain clouds, the clouds move in over the land. As they move over the land, they cool, and then the water the water vapor condenses, falls as rain, runs into the rivers, and then the rivers return the water to the sea. Now that rain cycle, it uses abstractions, condensation, evaporation, and so on. And it provides a systematized account, got a rain system, if you like, a theorized account. We can't see that rain cycle happening, We can draw pictures of it in textbooks and so on, but we can't actually observe it happening. But what it will do is it will explain rainfall, no matter where we are now and into the future. And it's sometimes called powerful knowledge because it will do this. It'll explain rainfall in the Amazon basin, in the steppes of Russia, as well as on the eastern and western coasts of South Africa. So it's there, this theorized, systematized account of the world. It's usually communicated in writing or using language forms associated with writing, if we do speak. And it's powerful because of this idea that it will explain rainfall everywhere. And it's the stuff of formal education. It's also the stuff of some homes. So if you're an educated caregiver, you have children yourself, then you're more likely to use this way of talking about the world in your home, and you will expose the children in your home to that. So within vertical discourse then, and I've got a little diagram there because it gets complicated because of course Bernstein uses the same word horizontal to mean two different things. So there you've got knowledge at the top, knowledge divided into horizontal discourse and vertical discourse, where horizontal draws on experience, but it's not powerful because it's localized, it's context bound, and the vertical, which provides these abstract systematized accounts, which are powerful. And within vertical discourse, you've got what's called a hierarchical structure and a horizontal structure. So in a hierarchical structure, which is typical of the natural sciences, researchers draw on data, they generate data, and what they're trying to do is to produce ever more arching theories and principles to account for all the data that comes in. And what researchers do typically is they bring in more data, and they're trying either to challenge a theory or a principle in some way, or extend it or elaborate upon it in some way. So that hierarchical structure, and it's often conceptualized as a kind of pyramid, that's typical of the natural sciences. It's sort of number-based knowledge areas. A horizontal structure, which is typical of the social sciences and the humanities, that uses theory, typically. And you use the theory like a pair of glasses. You look through the lens of the glasses and you see things you wouldn't otherwise see, or you see things differently. So the use of the theory allows us to see the world differently. So there you go. There's two different knowledge forms, horizontal and vertical discourse. And within vertical discourse, you've got a hierarchical structure and a horizontal structure. Okay. If I go back to vertical discourse, it's usually communicated in writing. It's the stuff of formal education, schools and universities. And it draws on other features of the knowledge form. For example, positions in a field, uncertainty and certainty, and where and how theory appears. So I'll try and explain that now. So if you think about the kind of knowledge we're interested in the university, this vertical discourse. So all the texts we produce, whether they're spoken or written, they're organized around what I call the knowledge claim evidence structure. So knowledge claims are statements the author or the speaker believes to be true. But the important thing about horizontal discourse is that we look to evidence to support the claim. So, kind of rule, if you like, in the university, certainly, you can't make a claim without the evidence for the claim. And then that claim and evidence structure is there, whether it's in a lecture or whether it's in something that you write. And evidence can take two forms. Evidence can be provided by references, the references that we all know about, or data from experiments from our own research or whatever, okay? And that's what references are for. It's not, sadly, as we often tell students, a reference is not to avoid plagiarism. A reference is to provide evidence for claims that we make. And I can just show you, I'm going to end the show. I hope this will work, Sim, and go to something which I've already opened. We go, no. Can you see a text with red and blue on your screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So this is an actual journal article. It's quite old now, but I've been using it to try to illustrate this point for many years. There's the reference at the top. And it's from the field of marine science about the production of abalone, perlman. And if you look at it, it exemplifies beautifully the knowledge claim evidence structure. So I've coloured the claims in red and the evidence in blue. So if you look at that first paragraph, total global abalone supply from legal and illegal fisheries and farm product to the world market in 2011 was estimated at 97 metric tons. How do you know? Where's the evidence? Well, the evidence takes the form of that reference from the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO 2012, at an average rate of 39.9% per annum between 2000 and 2008. How do you know? Well, the reference tells us there that will be the evidence for that. If you go on to the second sentence, farmed abalone increased significantly over the same period, and currently aquacultured abalone contributes to approximately 80% of the world abalone supply. How do you know? Where's the evidence? Well, Cook and Gordon provide it in this reference. So if you look throughout this, all the references provide evidence for knowledge claims. And in typical scientific fashion, you have claim, evidence, claim, evidence, claim, evidence, where just about every sentence is a knowledge claim, and there's a set of references in brackets at the end of the sentence providing the evidence for that claim. And of course, more and more evidence is provided. If you look at the beginning, let's look at the beginning of this second paragraph, elevated carbon dioxide, this second paragraph here, a desire to maximize production has promoted research into factors affecting growth, survival, and animal quality, with temperature, food supply, and water quality recognized as significant. You've got all those references, Harris, Maguire, Edwards, and Hindram, Harris, Maguire, Edwards, and Jones, all those references support that claim there. So it's sort of boom, boom, boom in this particular typical example, I would say, of scientific writing. Generally, we don't tell our students that references are about evidence, we'll often explain them as avoiding plagiarism. But that really is not the case, I would argue. They are evidence for knowledge claims that we need to make. Later on in that very same article, and I could have gone on to show you that, the authors use their own data to support the knowledge claims that they make. And what happens is that in an academic text, the authors or the speakers, if giving a formal lecture, they juxtapose opposing sets of claims and evidence. It's like they're saying, well, this group of people say this, but on the other hand, they'll refer to a different position in the belief system, and they'll present claims and evidence on either side. But what they'll ultimately do is present an argument for a particular position. So these people say this other lot of people say that, but on the whole, the evidence is stronger for the first position, and that's the one I'm going to draw on. Now, one of the problems, of course, because we don't tell them, is that students can't always see the different positions in knowledge fields. We can see them, we spot them, but we don't always explain to our students about these positions in ways that they can understand. So that's one of the things that happens within this vertical discourse that I'm talking about. Another example would be from my work with my colleague Sue McKenna, where you have all learning theories, we argue, can be located on a continuum. And the continuum stretches from an understanding of the student as what we call a decontextualized learner to, at the other end of the continuum, the student as a social being. So if you understand the student as a decontextualized learner, you say knowledge is knowledge is knowledge, and learning is learning is learning, and that it's open to anybody. So anybody can learn, provided they have the necessary intelligence, aptitude in some cases, and motivation, the willingness to work hard. So what that does is it allows you to say, oh, well, if the students fail, it's their fault. They didn't work hard enough, or they're not clever enough, or they're not motivated. At the other end of that continuum, you've got the student as a social being, and what that says is that there are many different knowledge forms, many different ways of knowing, and that different forms of knowledge and different ways of knowing are privileged in different spaces, and that some students are introduced to forms of knowledge and ways of knowing in their homes, and they therefore come into schools and university at an advantage. So along that continuum, you can place any learning theory, we argue. Some will be on the decontextualized end, some will be on the social end, some will be more towards the beginning, the middle. And the references, because the references are indicative of the people who are espousing these different positions, the references themselves will indicate the different positions on this continuum. So there's a whole lot of sort of insider knowledge here. It's often not explained directly to students. It's there, it's hidden. We know it because we got used to it. We got it somewhere along the way. Students don't always know it. Now, if you go to AI, artificial intelligence, and you think about that, AI produces very confident text. What are of the different positions in the field? Is it actually indicating different positions? Are these always indicated? Can the students see them? Not always, I don't think. So what's the problem then with using AI? You go to something like Claude or ChatGPT and you put in a prompt and something comes back and the student uses that. But do they understand what AI has done in relation to the different possible positions it is possible to occupy in a knowledge field? I don't think students do. The other thing that happens, and this goes back to my statement that AI often produces really confident text, is, let's go back to knowledge claims and evidence. Writers or speakers indicate their uncertainty using words that linguists call hedges. They can be more than words, they can be phrases, like it could be argued that, it might possibly be the case that. So may, could, possibly, arguably are all examples of hedges. And what hedges do is they limit a knowledge claim. And now one of the problems we have is that students aren't always trained to see and interrogate hedges. Hedges, and we've got research which has actually counted them in textbooks. They appear very infrequently in textbooks. Textbooks indicate a certain world, a world without all this uncertainty that we as researchers, academics, researchers, we all are very familiar with. But our students don't see it like that because they've been trained using textbooks. And so what's likely to happen is the students are likely to be impressed by the certainty in AI-produced text, even though it is in fact questionable. If you went back to the original texts, then you'd see that it's much more open to interrogation. So there's two things that I've referred to. I've referred to the idea of positions in a knowledge field and of certainty. The other thing, of course, is that this vertical discourse, the kind of knowledge that we value in the university, it draws on theory. And as I've already said, theory is like a pair of glasses. It allows us to see the world differently. AI doesn't understand theory, doesn't use theory. It identifies and replicates patterns. And I had an example of this recently where I was working on a big piece of research which involved a discourse analysis of policies on doctoral education. And to do a discourse analysis, I think you need to understand the concept of discourses. So for me, discourses are sets of ideas that sort of hang together in language and other sign systems. And what these ideas do is they literally bring things into being. They bring an object or an action, they bring people into being. And so as a result, words like construct are used. So a discourse constructs something. Okay? I mean, if you think about the difference between the word pupil and the word that we're supposed to use in South Africa, learner, to talk about young people in school, pupil brings into being the idea of somebody who's obedient, somebody who's going to listen to the student, to the teacher, and so on. Whereas the idea of the learner, and particularly when you bring this with other words or around the word learner, then that brings into being a more active participant in the learning process. So when you do discourse analysis, you identify these sets of ideas and you deconstruct them. So when you deconstruct, when you pull these sets of ideas apart and you say what's wrong with them, you draw on critical social theory, a theory that's concerned with social justice and so on. So what happened in this particular example of the research I was involved in, colleagues used AI. They fed in a whole lot of policies that were actually policies in Kenya. They fed in the policies on doctoral education, and they asked it to do a discourse analysis. I don't know what they used. What the AI did was it treated the discourses like themes. It did, I would say, really a broad thematic analysis of these policies, which at one level worked, because you could see, okay, well, that could be a discourse, but you needed an expert eye to say, yeah, it could be a discourse. But the concept of discourse itself was not understood. And as a result, one of the problems was the language was wrong. I do a lot of discourse analysis in my own research, was wrong to an expert eye. The language, for example, didn't use the word construct. So it seemed to me that the AI tool was not, it produced something that was okay-ish, but it needed a lot of work. It needed more work linguistically to get the language right, to use words like construct. It needed to bring more critical social theory in, but broadly it had identified some sets of ideas that could be identified as discourses. So it was useful, yes, but I would have submitted that. Not perfect by any means. So the other thing that we need to do when we think about theory is, because academic work, you know, it's also theory in all our work, because this vertical discourse draws on theory. It's theorized, systematized, abstract ways of describing the world. So the knowledge structure, remember I talked about the difference there between a hierarchical structure and a horizontal structure. The knowledge structure will impact on the way a theory appears in the text. In the social sciences, theory is usually explicit. You talk about the theory, you write a section on the theory. In a PhD, you'll write a chapter on the theory. And you'll talk about what the theory, the components of the theory, how it operates, and you'll talk about what it allows you to see. In the natural sciences, and I've done research on this myself, the theory is often located in the literature review. And I'll show you how, I'll show you where. Let me go back, let me go to that previous screen. There you go. If you look at that third paragraph there, right, it begins, elevated partial pressure of carbon dioxide in seawater and associated reductions in seawater, okay? I don't understand this theory because I'm not an ichthyologist, I'm not a scientist. But I wonder, could you switch off everybody mute yourselves, please? Okay. So I interviewed, as part of my own research, I interviewed a number of people, scientists from the science knowledge areas, and I asked them to bring along an article from their field. And when the article was on the table, I just said to them, could you tell me where the theory is? And the man I was interviewing about this particular article, he said to me, oh, it's here, it's in this paragraph, this third paragraph, beginning elevated partial pressure. And he then proceeded to write an equation, a scientific equation, based on the third paragraph. He could see the theory in there. Students couldn't see that. And in fact, one of the reasons why I had interviewed this particular man was because I'd been working with students in the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity that's located in Makanda. And they were postgraduate students working on a big national project. And I was supposed to be helping them with writing their literature reviews. And I can remember there was one woman, and her research, she was honours. Her research involved, there were honours, masters and PhD. And they were all in this workshop about their literature reviews. Her actual project involved counting the distribution of limpets on the shoreline. Limpets are those little animals that disappear under the sand when you walk on a beach. So I said to her, why are you doing that? Why is it important to do that? I knew there would be a theory about limpets in an estuary. So it seemed to me that she needed to explain that, to indicate that somehow, somewhere in her writing. And she couldn't tell me. And then I asked the class, or can anybody else help here? And I asked, well, what's the theory about limpets? Why do you have to count limpets? And somebody said to me, there is no theory. We don't have theory in science. And they all agreed. And then I went to the lecturers and said, what, you don't have theory in science? That's not true, is it? And they laughed. So this then, of course we have theory. This then led me to interviewing people about, well, show me the theory, where is the theory, and so on. In my research, students can't see, they can't see the theory here, okay? So the other thing my informant told me about this particular article was that when he looked at it, he also knew which theory the authors were drawing on because of the names in the references. He said, oh yes, so-and-so, so-and-so. Of course, there is something describing the particular kind of scientists they were. So he could also see the theory based on the names. That was his expertise coming through. The students couldn't do that, to the extent that they told me, oh, there is no theory. Okay, so the point is that students often can't see theory or understand how it's used. So if I go back to, here was I, presented with a piece of AI that had did the discourses in policy on doctoral education in Kenya, and I could see a problem with the use of discourse theory. Would students be able to see that? They'd probably just think, oh yeah, this AI-generated text is wonderful. It was useful. It really was useful, but it couldn't be used as it stood in my expert understanding. Okay, one last thing about this kind of knowledge that we value in the university. And I said previously that vertical discourse draws on writing versus horizontal discourse. The first bit isn't very well expressed there. Horizontal discourse draws on speech. Now, writing and speech have different linguistic forms. And I'm quoting a linguist here called Halliday. So Halliday says that vertical discourse, written language, centers around nominal groups and creates a world of things, structures, discontinuous, rigid, and determinate. It draws on, written language draws on different language forms, which is speech, which is organized around clauses and processes. And this ultimately creates a world that is moving and flowing and continuous, elastic, and indeterminate. So as students move from the horizontal discourse of the home, the kind of statements like "it always rains in summer," to the vertical discourse of school, the rain cycle, they're going to draw on different linguistic forms. And they'll also draw on different vocabulary elements. So they might say the rain falls in summer, whereas in school, the teachers talk about precipitation. Precipitation obviously means more than rain, means snow as well. But yeah, they use on different vocabulary forms, and think as well about terms like evaporation and condensation and so on. So the language of speech and writing, the language of these knowledge forms are different. Now, let me come back to South African higher education. So depending on their home background, students arrive in university and in school with varying levels of command of the abstract, theorized, systematized knowledge of vertical discourse. Some students, some children will arrive in school having been introduced to vertical discourse in their homes. So I have granddaughters, and I've got two sons. One of my sons has two daughters, and my son is a pilot. And one of his children was playing with a plastic plane, and she was running the plane along the ground. And her father started to talk to her about why the plane went into the air. And he started talking about air under the wings and lift. Now, the concept of lift, you can't see that happening. You see the plane going into the air. But he was actually drawing on his knowledge as a pilot, this abstract concept of lift in a theory of how planes fly. And there he was talking about it to his 7-year-old daughter, who was just happened to be idly running the plane along the ground. So what an advantage that he was giving her this conversation, having this conversation. He was providing this explanation in the house. And of course, if you think about it, he would have explained, and her mother as well, would have explained other things in the world around my granddaughter in the same way, using this abstract, theorized, systematized knowledge. So that was probably before my granddaughter even went to school. She'd had a couple of years in school by this time. And then if you think about her going to school, she would come home with homework, or the parents might ask, "What did you do today? What did you learn about today?" And she might try to explain what she'd learned, and the parents would be able to support my granddaughter's engagement with this abstract systematized knowledge, this vertical discourse. And of course, the school quality would also play a part, as depending on the school, teachers have varying command of vertical discourse. So think about students in your classes at Stellenbosch. They've had very different experiences before they came to the university. Their homes have been very different. They've been to different kinds of school. Some have been very privileged, others haven't. And so they'll arrive with varying command of the vertical discourse that we prize, we really value, and the language and the kind of complex understandings that I was talking about earlier, things like different positions in the field and so on, they'll have more of an inkling of that than others will. So, you know, the disadvantage comes from home, from birth, as well as from the school. So in this complex problem, where you've got, and I'm suggesting at this point, that the complex problem involves both a knowledge form, I'd say it's primarily a knowledge form, the need to shift from experiential knowledge, spoken language associated with it, of vertical discourse, horizontal discourse, it always rains in summer type knowledge, to the abstract knowledge of the rain cycle. I'd say that's the primary problem, but the language is associated with that. So we've got that complex problem, and now AI comes onto the stage. And of course, AI is very attractive, isn't it? Not only is it easy, but the AI-generated text can often be faulted. So we've got AI and we've got the issue of language and knowledge. So we've got this really complex problem. But a complex problem, but the AI will be very, very attractive. It produces a sophisticated text that sounds and looks academic. And that's what the teachers want. That's what you want. The students understand, they know you want that. It does it very quickly. But the problem for teachers, academic teachers for you, very quickly shifts to detection and concerns about cheating. When actually, should your concerns be about the fact that students haven't mastered the knowledge form, and the knowledge form I'm talking about here is that vertical discourse and the language associated with it. That's the problem. Because if you, yes, use AI, but you've got to use AI intelligently. But if you haven't got the kind of the knowledge form, and if you haven't got the way language is associated with it, and you haven't got all the other things that I was talking about earlier, like position, knowledge claims, evidence, and so on and so on, you're not going to be able to use AI. You're not going to be able to fault it and use it productively. So that basically is my argument. The argument goes beyond students using AI to avoid work. What you want them to do is to be able to use it smartly. That's the way the world will be, but we've still got this very powerful knowledge form, and we want them to use it in that way, to use that knowledge form. But if we're focusing on detection and concerns about cheating rather than the knowledge itself, then I think we've got a big problem. So altogether, I don't know how much sense I've made. I hope I've made some sense. Work on knowledge allows us to see that what is often identified as a language problem is actually a knowledge problem. This isn't helped by academic teachers who take the red pen approach to correct or write over their students. How often do you correct the language? You correct the language, but actually the problem is the knowledge form. Your students lack a familiarity with the knowledge form. And I would argue that they probably couldn't write in the way that you want them to write in their home language either. And then if you go to the university addresses the language problem, so-called, I've got that in inverted commas, using general courses taught by language specialists who may not be, and I've introduced a new term there, knowledge literate themselves. You know, often people teaching those very general courses, they might have a master's degree, often they'll have a master's degree in applied language studies or linguistics or something like that. I'm talking about myself here. I used to do that. I used to teach those language courses. I didn't understand knowledge the way I understand knowledge now. Okay, so you then got these courses supposed to be helping students, but the people teaching the courses might not understand actually what it is that is the problem. And then the other thing, of course, is that if they do understand that it's the knowledge forms that are a problem, they may only understand the form from a particular disciplinary area. Yeah. So I can write well in my own discipline. I'd call it higher education studies. I can't write elsewhere. I know how to make knowledge in my area. I don't know so well how to write it elsewhere. So you've got this generalized approach. So I think we've got a problem in our understanding here, and our understanding of the problem itself. The problem of students' learning experiences, the problem of language, the problem of AI. We've got a problem in the way we're conceptualizing that. Then we're bringing more problems into the equation by the way we address it. So if I now try to bring them all together, so what does it mean going forward? I think what I'm trying to argue here is that language has to be developed in conjunction with knowledge, and that the use of AI needs to be taught in relation to teaching about knowledge and language, right? We have to teach students about this knowledge form, because at the moment, this vertical discourse, what it does, why it's powerful, and so on. Students will often say, oh, it's all that theory stuff, or we get those calls for skills. I once had a dispute with the SRC president at Rhodes when I was DVC, who said, no, we don't want theory, we want skills. Oh, what a position to take. You know, if we can't give you, you know, this powerful way of understanding the world around you, I think we've taken your money for nothing. So then the question, what does all this mean for academic literacy courses and writing centres that the universities rely on? So what I'm arguing here, and I'm aware that I probably haven't made myself very clear, but as I said, this is like a first pass at this stuff, and I hopefully will get better on it, the more I speak about it and try to write it, is that I think we've really got to rethink what we're doing with students, who does it, where we do it, and so on, because AI has complicated a problem that was already very complex. So this brings me back to an argument I originally made more than, 12 years ago, when I argued whether teaching in universities is teaching students about how to make knowledge rather than disseminating it. We often think, and I know that on professional development courses, academic teachers, you know, those developing teaching courses, they will often come in and they talk about you disseminate the knowledge, and students will say you get the knowledge, students disseminate the knowledge. Is that actually what university is about? Or are we teaching students about disseminating it? I wrote about that in 2012. I argue that even at first year level. This isn't about teaching a research methods course. This is teaching students about how knowledge is made, and that we do, that's actually what we're trying to do. And then in 2015, I wrote a booklet for students at Rhodes University, which tried to get that across to students. I'll show you that in a minute. So my argument is, do we have to rethink university teaching to say it's actually not disseminating knowledge, but it's about teaching students about a knowledge form and how to make it. And as we do this, do we then bring AI into the picture? So there's the references. I'll share this and I'll just show you the book. So this was the booklet I wrote for students. It's called, and I'll just show you that. So the first thing I talk about is the university being a knowledge factory. It's not a knowledge supermarket. It's not a place where you come to get knowledge. It's a place where you come to learn about it and how it's made. And then I move on, there's knowledge and there's knowledge and there's knowledge. There's different knowledge forms. And the knowledge here in this university is different to the knowledge in the street. And then I go on and talk. You can see there, item 10, knowledge claims, evidence, and so on and so on. So this was my attempt some years ago to have a go at getting across to students what I thought they needed to know. I think that needs revisiting now in an age of AI. But yeah, if anybody wants me to share this, I'm very happy to do so. But for now, sorry, I didn't mean to show that. Let me go back to my screen. Where am I? There. Okay. I hope that made sense, then. I'm very happy to take any questions.
I hope so too. Thank you so much, Chrissy, for that thought-provoking conversation. I think from when we spoke and about the presentation in a brief, I said, we should look, I'd like you to engage us on emphasizing, knowledge in teaching and learning in a world of AI. So perhaps ours as academics shouldn't be about looking or monitoring or policing students in their use of AI, but about teaching them in understanding the kinds of knowledge that these tools can help them to acquire the knowledge. But I think an interesting twist that I wasn't prepared for was also language that you have put in the presentation as well, with which I didn't think about before. So yeah, thank you so much. We have ran out of time, but I see there are still colleagues who are around. Is there anyone who has a question or a comment to Chrissy while I look at the chats? You can unmute your mic and go ahead. Okay, I do not see any questions on the chats. Okay, well, in fact, there's a question to you, Chrissy, on, I think that's Cornell. She says that interesting document, want to do a refresher one for SU from Chrissy. I think that is a request if you could write a document for SU as well. Thank you, Cornell.
There's one there, Sim. Can you confirm what you mean by language? Okay. I understand language as a resource that we have to make sense of the world around us. And the kind of language that I would draw on holiday. I don't know whether you are a linguist, Taneha. I would draw on the work of Halliday to see language not as a tool to communicate ready-made meanings. So I don't understand language that you have the ideas and then you put those out, you encode those ideas in language. I think the kind of language that you have at your disposal allows you to understand the world in different ways.
Thank you.
I've actually, I've nearly written a new book. I'm on the last chapter, which I've called at the moment The Language Story, which brings all that I know on language together. So if you're interested, when it's done.
I am. I'll look out for it. Thank you.
All right, colleagues, if there's no one else, can you please take a moment and give Chrissy and the CTL about your overall feedback and thoughts on how we could improve our sessions. So if there is nothing else, thank you so much for being present and coming to this presentation. We will see you on the next one in September. Chrissy, thank you so much for your time and your insightful thoughts. We wish you the best with the book and we're looking forward to it. Perhaps, yes, you could come and launch it here on Auxin and talk about it, as soon as it is published next year.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Colleagues, okay, I see, I think is that Prof. Van Wyk. She says, I wonder what Bernstein would have thought of AI. Oh, and still works. Yeah.
It's a different knowledge form, isn't it? It is a different knowledge form. I asked myself that question a few weeks ago. Is it a different knowledge form? And I think today's helped me to say, yeah, it is. It's a different knowledge form.
All right. Chrissy, I guess you can still go through the comments because I see there is Mkize is asking for the book. Perhaps if you can forward it to them as well.
Okay, that old Are You Connected? Are You Learning? Yeah, sure, I'll do that.
Yes, the Are You Learning?
I'll send it to Sim, okay.
Okay. Colleagues, thank you so much for your time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.